All right, so buckle up for a high wind adventure. I'm going to take you into Death Valley's dunes in a huge sandstorm and talk about some distraction removal techniques that I used for some high contrast images that I captured of dawn in that sandstorm situation with schmutz on my lens. We'll also talk about why one of the panoramic mergers I captured of those dunes, I'm choosing to use Photoshop's panoramic merger engine instead of Lightroom's for some of its more advanced functionality. Well, hey everyone, it's Hudson. Fun stuff today. It's kind of a cold and wintry day here in the Pacific Northwest spring. We had like 74 degrees last week, and now we had 1.5 inches of snow here yesterday morning. So weird yo-yo weather going on right now, and I'm feeling like a return to winter. So I've been inside, I've been doing some editing, and I want to take you along on some of the images that we captured in this massive sandstorm in Death Valley. Before we do that, couple quick announcements. One, I had someone cancel on the Palouse workshop, which launches in just 15 days on April 29th. So into this month. We're going into the Palouse. Palouse is spectacular. It's that kind of rolling hills, Tuscan-like landscape, but with Northwest farm, flavor and this kind of college town atmosphere with great food and funky old farm towns. It's a great place to photograph in spring. You would be joining 9 other awesome participants. Some of my favorite people are coming along on this workshop. Rick and I, we got El Jefe. Sadly, the person who had to cancel through no fault of their own is kind of outside of that full refund window unless I can find somebody either off the wait list or from you as a group at large at the last minute to fill that slot. So it'd be helping me out and helping them out. I'd love to have you. You can check out more, learn all about it, download the PDF about it, hudsonhenry.com/workshops. All right. Speaking of end of the month, we're going to be doing office hours, April 26th, that big free photography get together to talk all things photographic. We had David Archer on last week, and he was showing us some of his just amazing bird photos with the Z9. David's based in South Carolina, runs workshops with me, is just an amazing photographer in general, but his bird stuff will blow your mind. And he agreed to come back end of April on the 26th, 10 a.m. Pacific, and talk to everybody about some of his tips and techniques for capturing better wildlife and bird photos. So bring questions. You can sign up at hudsonhenry.com/office hours. Leave a question when you sign up. And we'll be taking questions about all things photographic, but in specific, we're looking for birds, wildlife, and action questions since we have David there to help us answer them. So it's a great opportunity. I hope to see you there on Zoom where I can see your face, and YouTube Live if you can't make it to Zoom. Sign up and leave us a question, all right? So one more quick thing. During the office hours, people said they'd seen me messing around with my Z9 with a big holster that fit it, sort of an old school camera holster. And it's true, I have this holster that I've had somewhere between 15 and 20 years from Kinesis, and I've been using it with the Z9. It works great. It's just a really high quality ballistic nylon, relatively waterproof. It has a full waterproof zipper along with a quick snap catch for keeping your camera inside. Big pocket that fits a full pro flash or a bunch of filters, accessories, and batteries. And your camera just fits right in there. I tend to leave a little camera bag insert like you'd use to divide compartments in your camera bag, Velcroed in there at whatever height I want when I'm using a stock lens with it so it doesn't drop all the way in. But it'll hold your pro body with a 70-200, and there's lots of D-rings all over the thing to mount it on your hip or your backpack or use a shoulder strap with it. It's great for keeping your 70-200 and your camera in the car just sitting next to you ready to go, or for just hiking around with that big body. So they still make this. It's a great bag. I'm going to put a link to it in this video's full description. B&H is still selling it, so look for that. It's bomb-proof. All right, so let's talk about this big sandstorm. So we got together, my group in Death Valley, for the workshop with Rick last month. Beautiful weather. We went out in the dunes. There were tons of footprints all over it. We looked at the weather forecast. There was wind forecast for the next night. We said, let's go out that next morning and see if it's blown the footprints, swept them clean, because it's amazing to be out in the dunes early before dawn, first one out there without any footprints in the dunes. It's a special experience. So we told everybody, get the lens on that you want on your camera. We talked about what that might be. For me, it was my 24-120 on the Z9. Make sure you got your stone bag on your tripod in case that wind is blowing. You can weight it down with sand. Put the spikes on your tripod. Put links to my favorite spikes from Leo Photo that have the little spin-off plastic covers to keep you from hurting yourself and others, and also this stone bag and the kinesis bag will all be in this video's full description. But we all got out there in the van before dawn in the dark, and the wind was blowing. The van was rocking when we got to the dunes. It was still blowing hard, and it was blowing at our backs. And as we went in the dark, the further we went in, the more sand was entrained in the wind, and we were all, putting our masks on. Luckily, a lot of us had masks because COVID was still a reality. Still is a reality, but we put those masks on happily to keep the sand out of our lungs, and hiked through there, big flashlights. That's enough of a setup. I'm going to show you a little video that gives you a feel and flavor of what the experience was for everybody. It was pretty epic. There were several of us, taking shots with our cell phone and filming with our cell phone. My friend Liam loaned me some footage of myself out there. I shot some footage in 10-bit once the sun came up. 4K with the Z9, it does such an amazing job. So I've got a little footage of what it was like to be out there in that bit of light that we had. We had epic light. I'll show you the video. I think it speaks for itself of the experience. The windstorm?
You made Fury Road.
The windstorm in the dunes, you're not wanting a repeat of that?
I would go back any day.
There you go.
It was spectacular. A once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Peter, were you sure the entire time we were going to be okay in the windstorm?
No, I wasn't. I really was questioning whether, I was with the right person out in the wilderness. When you were smiling and laughing in the 50-mile-an-hour wind as we were getting sandblasted, I wasn't really sure. But then the light came out, and the light came on, and it was amazing, totally amazing.
It was an adventure. It was an adventure. Yeah, so it was fun.
Thoughts on the windstorm?
It was the best experience of my life, except for, well, maybe the Hudson Henry workshop in Patagonia, or the Hudson Heavy workshop in Moab, or maybe the Hudson Heavy workshop in Tetons.
All right, so I will say that at one point pre-dawn, as we were kind of scouting for where we wanted to be in the dark, trying to get people sheltered from the sand blowing into us as much as possible, keeping everybody together as a group, I did lean into Rick at one point and say, it's times like these I sometimes question my life choices, but when that light came up, it was incredible. And I didn't talk to anybody who regretted going out there on that journey. It was an adventure, and it paid off. It's the kind of experience that makes me so fulfilled as a wildlands photographer. It's kind of what it's all about. It was epic. It was amazing. It's one of those experiences I will look back and smile on for the rest of my days. So, let's go in, let's take a look at some of the images and some of the issues that I had editing a couple of those images, and how I used some more advanced distraction tools to mitigate those problems, as well as why I chose Photoshop's merger engine for a panorama over Lightroom's in a situation where there's some vignetting in the lens. Let's just jump in and have a look. All right, so I'm here in Lightroom, and I'm going to walk through some of the images from that just epic Sandstorm dawn, but I want to really focus on this one, and I'm going to show you some tricks for how I dealt with the fact that this was A, so high contrast, and that B, in stopping down to what I shoot this at f/22 in order to capture this with my Z9 and the 24-120 that was on the front of it, and I wasn't about to switch lenses in that storm, that, stopping down showcased every bit of sand and schmutz that was on the front of my lens in the storm. We've got a little issue with some stuff here and here and here and a little bit in the Sunstar. I'm going to show you how to use a tool that if you're a Lightroom and Photoshop subscriber, you have in Photoshop that'll make that job easier for you. And also just why I don't use graduated neutral density filters. I stick to the filters that I have from Case. I use the magnetic UV filter just to protect the front element of my new 24-120 f4S lens. But here, we'll talk through that in a minute, how you get from there to this result, from a set of bracketed images, shooting them 3 stops apart. I also want to talk through a panoramic capture that I got from one of my favorite places in Death Valley, a view of these dunes from above and a ways away at dawn. It's something that I go with every workshop to hope for the conditions to be just right. This was a nice dawn. Someday I'm going to get the perfect clouds I'm waiting for, but this was nice light on the foreground dunes. But as I assembled this panorama in Lightroom, I noticed that, without even going into doing any noise reduction or anything else, that as I was editing it and adding contrast to the sky, I saw there was some issues with vignetting in between the images, creating these sort of shadow lines along through the sky. They're not as noticeable in the darker parts of the image, but a lot of times you'll see, if you have a panorama with a little bit of vignetting, I shot this with my 100 to 400 millimeter lens, at about, I think, 300 millimeters or something. Where was I at? 280 millimeters. That, it was resulting in some vignetting. And that's something that's difficult to deal with if you merge your panoramas in Lightroom. But if instead you take the extra step and go through the little more sophisticated engine in Photoshop, you can use its vignette removal and get a much cleaner result for you to go through and finish process. So we'll talk about both of those things as we go through and look at some images from Death Valley. There you saw all those panoramic captures. So, the first day in Death Valley, after we met up and had a little classroom session, we went out into the dunes to kind of scout and look at them, which was a good thing because the next time we went in was pre-dawn in the dark, like you saw in that video. The wind was ripping. We knew it was going to be windy, and we told everyone, get the lens that you want to shoot the whole morning on. We talked through what that might be with different people with different tastes, but you're not going to be switching lenses if it's windy, and it was sure windy in the morning, and the wind was to our backs as we walked in. So as you saw in that video, the deeper we got in, the more sand was in the air, and we really got into a situation where it was very, very Mad Max Thunder Road like. But as dawn came up, as I was hoping and predicting, we got into a situation where the wind started to calm down a little bit. It often does at dawn in Death Valley if you spend enough time in there. And sure enough, we had a crack on the horizon, and you could tell we were going to get great light right where the sun was rising. And we knew it was going to be high contrast. So we talked about, let's make sure that we're bracketing so that we don't wind up with blown out exposures or blocked out blacks in our image. Bracket 3 stops apart. On the meter, 3 stops over, 3 stops under. So, here's my on the meter image. Now, on the small screen in the middle of the dust storm, I couldn't notice that I had some schmutz on my lens. It's particularly apparent when you stop down to f/22 to capture the sun star. But I did bracket. This is my meter reading, and you can see. Let's have a look at our histogram here. It's very high contrast. We're off both sides of the histogram. This is my shot 3 stops underexposed. That's a pretty good underexposed image for the histogram. You can still see we're not going to have any detail in the sun, but it's not so blown out. It's going to be a white blob. It's looking pretty good on the histogram, and it looked good on the histogram on camera. Here's my 3 stops overexposed image. Our shadows, our blacks have moved into the shadows and midtones. We definitely have all of the detail we want. We're shooting at base ISO, f/22. Long exposure, at a second, and I can tell you we had a lot of sand in our sandbags and our stone bags in order to keep the cameras rock solid in the wind and spikes set into the sand. This is a situation where I think a lot of people still have that kind of old school mindset, well, I'll put a graduated neutral density filter in here. Well, that's complicated in a dust storm, and this is not a straight line of exposure. You've got highlights in here, you got shadows back here. You're going to be making everything that's shadowed much, much darker, and the line is wavy, not straight. So instead, by capturing 3 differentially exposed images like these 3 and blending them into a linear raw file that has all that data contained, you're going to get a much better result. And the way you do that is just, if you're in the grid view, you just select those 3 images, that bracketed set. I like to color code those yellow. Yellow to me means it's an HDR set. And you're going to right click them and say photo merge, and choose HDR, not panorama, but HDR. We're going to merge those images into one resultant image. And it'll come up with a dialog box. If your dialog box isn't big and full screen, you can resize it. Often I find that Lightroom sets it up looking really small, which is hard to work with. I like to use the Windows feature where I just drag it to the top and it makes it full screen. And now I'm like, ooh, I have some schmutz in here. There's some choices that you can make in the HDR merger, and I've talked about these before, but auto align is one that I always turned on if I'm hand holding a rapidly series captured set of images. I usually leave it on if it's windy and I'm on the tripod too. It was pretty windy out there. Auto settings is where it just tries to build a nice histogram for starters with all that wide gamut linear data. So I generally leave that turned on. Looks a little yellow to me, but we can work on that later. Deghosting is if there are things that are moving in your image. Think waves rolling into the beach or people walking through the scene. It's going to sort of pick one of them and try to build all the images around that without having sort of ghosted motion showing up looking odd in your image. We don't have that here. There's a sandstorm blowing through, but it's sort of soft and flowing enough that it doesn't really matter. It's like really long exposure water. I'm not going to bother with that at all. I could experiment if there were things that are moving with different settings and have a look at it, but I don't think that's important to me. And I would click Create Stack, and that's going to take those 3 underlying images and put them together in a stack in Lightroom's database with the new resultant linear DNG raw file that has all that exposure data of all 3 images sitting on top of the stack. You can always look at any one of the individual images, but it's going to stack it all together. Now, I don't need to do this right now because I've already done it. I'll click Cancel. If I did click Merge, we'd come back into the library and you'd see a little progress bar running along the top saying, merging to HDR. And bing, it would be done. It would stack all these together and put the merged file on top of it. Here's the merged HDR image that I got back. See here, it's an HDR DNG. Lightroom's going to name it that. And it has this schmutz on it. And I've gone in, I'll go into Develop right now. I'm going to hit the D key. That's a shortcut for Develop. You could also go up here and just click Develop if you have the top panel open. I like to keep the panels kind of shut so that I have a nice wide view of what I'm working on, bigger view. I like to make sure, however, that my editing panel's long enough that I have a lot of movement in these sliders. And I've gone through and done my reprocessing. I've set the tones to sort of my taste. I like it to be shadowy. I like it to be contrasty. And I like just this detail in the sun. You can see we don't have anything blown out to pure white. We have a very bright sun, all 3 color channels, but it's not blown out. If we were to print this, there's no pure white in this image to worry about. All right, but we do have schmutz. And so I want to talk for a second about how we deal with that schmutz. If we're in the develop view or the grid view or the loop view in library, I'm going to go back into the library here, click, and we'll look at the grid view. I have this image selected. All I need to do is right click it, and I'm going to go ahead and say edit in, and we're going to go into Photoshop 2022. And we're going to talk about content aware fill here in Photoshop. Now Photoshop has a lot of different panels. I have 2 screens active. A lot of my panels are off on my other screen. I can move them in and out and show you things that I have there. But you can access those panels from the window menu. And you want to make sure that you can see layers right now. You want to make sure that you can see your tools. This is layers right here, a stack of layers, and this is your tool panel right here, okay? We're going to grab our lasso tool. That's the first tool we're going to use. If you long click and hold on this section, it might show up as the polygon or the magnetic lasso. If it looks like that and you click and hold on it, you can choose just the straight up lasso tool. It looks like a rodeo rope, right? And I want to create a new layer that I'm working on. So I'm not doing anything destructively. I have a layer underneath that's untouched, the original layer without any edits on it whatsoever. Because remember, when we work in Photoshop, we're no longer raw processing. It's not metadata editing. We're changing pixels. So I want to go up here. I'm making a new layer. I choose the layer menu. I say duplicate layer. And we can name it whatever. I'll just call it schmutz. You can do that if you want, or you can call it layer 0, whatever. Schmutz will remind me what I'm doing with it. And I'm going to use some keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to use Control. When I say Control for you Mac folks, that's Command. Same thing, I'm on the PC here. I'm going to use Control plus a couple of times. That's just zooming in. Minus zooms out, plus zooms in if you're holding the Control key down. Then I want to hold the space bar key down, and that gives me the little hand tool. No matter what tool might be, like the lasso right now, if I hold that down, it becomes the hand, and I can just drag things around. And then I want to hit the plus one more time, and we're going to deal with this big piece of schmutz right up at the mountaintop, the very first thing. So I have my lasso tool, I'm on my layer called schmutz, and I'm going to just draw a circle around that. Big enough that it's not, that I've got clear margins. If you were thinking surgically, it's clear margins around it. I want to make sure I take out all the schmutz. I'm going to go edit and choose content aware fill. That's kind of the magic 3 words here for what we're working on. Now, it's going to change things a little bit. I'm okay with that. All right. You're seeing right here, you can resize this right panel. All right. You're seeing what it looked like before and what it looks like now in this preview on the right side. And you want to go in here and make sure your output isn't set to a new layer. Let's output it to the current layer, which is schmutz. We're going to just edit on schmutz. And I'm going to say, okay, boom, and bam. All of a sudden, it's slightly changed. Doesn't really bother me. If it bothers you, you can go in and do a lot of clone work. You could go in and sort of surgically remove some things. I'll show you what I'm talking about right here. And I'm not going to do this entire bunch of schmutz because it's a lot of small moves. If you have a Wacom tablet, this is a great time to get it out and be super precise. It's like a drawing exercise. You zoom in, get super precise, and what we want to do is draw around this kind of schmutz just in one section without touching that edge of the dune. And we'll go the same thing, edit, content aware fill. We'll look at our preview. It looks great. We say okay. Boom, that section of schmutz is gone. Then I would go and do this little bit right here. There's sort of a darkened bit of sand right there. And, I would use my Wacom tool and be more precise about this. But this is going to be good enough for right now, I think. Go in. That looks great. It gets rid of that line that was right there. I say, okay, boom. And I would do the same thing here and here and, through each little section to get rid of that little band that's moving across. But I do it where I'm leaving those bands of light and shadow alone. So you would do several moves like that. You got another one right here that's pretty good size. Maybe just roll up like that right along the edge without crossing it. Boom. And say edit, content aware fill, have a look at our preview, it looks good, say okay, boom, schmutz be gone. Now this schmutz layer is working for us. If I turn it on and off, see underneath, we see the layer underneath. Obviously you still need to work on this section right here. And like I said, if the ridgeline really matters to you, changing or not, you could very easily go in and do the same thing we were doing here, just paint it in above and below, and it'll do just as good a job. There's another little bit right here that's kind of troublesome, this sort of ghost that's happening from what's going on inside the lenses, the different elements of the lens sort of reflecting in there. That's kind of a big scale ghost. I'm going to use content aware fill on that. That looks a lot better. Say okay. You can refine this. You can do multiple passes of it. Another tool that you're going to use in a situation like this where you got just a little, I don't know, I think that's a little bit of sensor dust, is you're going to grab a different tool. Actually, we're going to leave the lasso tool and just click to get rid of the selection. Because I'm not working with the selection anymore. I'm just working on the image. And I want this spot healing brush. There are multiple tools that could be on top here, from the patch brush, healing brush. I want the spot healing brush that has the Band-Aid with that little dotted line along the top left side of it. And I can resize it with my bracket keys. Right bracket makes my brush bigger, left bracket makes it smaller. I'm going to make it just bigger than that schmutz spot and just click it. Boom. Just click that. Boom. Just click that. Boom. Here's another little bit of sensor dust. I'm just going to run through and clean up the sensor dust. Lightroom has a really similar tool. Once you've used the one in Photoshop, if you have extensive sensor dust to get rid of, I would advocate using the Photoshop tool just because it's so darn quick and so good. And I love the ability to kind of run around with the hand tool looking zoomed in. It's really easy to see stuff and just quick to move around your image, cleaning things up. All right, so once again, we have a look. We're still working on the schmutz layer. You can see we've done a lot right there. All right. If we hit Control-0, it gives us the fit view, the whole image viewed at the same time in whatever size window and monitor that you have. Now, you have a choice. you could save this out with the layer. You can see it doubles its size. The base image was 252.8 megapixels. Now with the 2 layers, it's 505, or not megapixels, megabytes. Now it's 505.6 megabytes, a half a gigabyte. If you want to save all the edits that you've done to be able to go back and rework them, well, then just save it with schmutz and say, it's going to look like that when it comes back into Lightroom. It's going to look like all the edits are done on it. But if you were to open it again, this Photoshop document in Photoshop, all of your edits will be there. You'll still have the 2 layers with the underlying untouched layer. So that's a really nice thing that you can do. Otherwise, if you want to conserve space, you can go up to Layer and click Flatten the Image, and that will compress everything into 1 layer. You lose all those edits you just did, but they're baked in essentially. I mean, they're there, you just aren't able to go in and undo them and re-edit them. All right, so I don't need to save this image because I've already done it. I've already done the work at a higher level, so I'm going to say, no, I'm not saving it. We'll jump back into Lightroom here and have a look at, the resultant PSD image looked like this. Pretty darn nice. And I went in and did some editing in Photo Raw. I've got a TIFF file here. All I did was marked this image 3 stars and made sure the metadata was saved out to the image. And then I opened up Photo Raw in the same folder and filtered down to 3-star images. And I've got other videos about editing in Photo Raw. I just applied a preset of mine in my summer presets that I put out last year for Photo Raw 2021. They still work in Photo Raw 2022. I applied a preset called Light and Shadow, and it just kind of warmed up the highlights, cooled down the shadows, and added a little bit of contrast and drama, and brightened the shadow details up a little bit. Gave it this nice look that I really like, just really simply. I tweaked it a tiny bit. So there you go. All right. Let's jump back into our grid view. So you can see some more images from that morning. I mean, it really was just a spectacular dawn. Before the sun hit, we had that just soft, kind of amazing look to the dunes. And then, the light hit and we had this just epic dawn that was a great moment to be bracketing. And then, as the light, I shot a little bit of that 10-bit Nikon Z9 footage of the sand just blowing across the dunes, made sure I had plenty of sand in my stone bag to keep the camera still. And then in that last bit of light, I saw, we had some photographers way out there in the distance, that small person, big world shot, that sand still just blowing through the dunes and the look of it blowing off the slip faces. You can see it entrained in the air, and just the backlight makes it so spectacular. Everyone in the workshop was having a ton of fun. I think people were wondering, like, what the heck am I doing out here? And then, when the light came, that's when we remembered what we were doing. And I gotta say, that 24-120 just does such a nice Sunstar. I've been so pleased with that. It's my favorite Sunstar from a Z lens yet. The 14-24 is not bad either. So we did some Milky Way work. We explored other parts of Death Valley, Zabriskie Point, Golden Canyon, the Red Cathedrals, Cottonwood Flats. We had a nice evening in Cottonwood Flats. We shot a lot of Milky Way out there. We had another beautiful dawn in the dunes, different location, a totally different type of morning where there had been wind the night before and the tracks were erased and we were the first out there, but there was no wind at dawn, or not any wind for us, having just weathered what we did. And we were able to change lenses, move from the 14mm to the 400mm and do some focus stacking and just enjoy ourselves thoroughly out there. And then the last day we went out to the Artist Drive and Artist Palette and got together as a group, just had a nice evening shooting. And we didn't get the light, we didn't get back in time for the light that we were hoping for at the dunes for this big kind of overview shot. And so even though the workshop was technically over, I said, let's all meet up in the morning before we take off and head our separate ways and shoot one last dawn out at the dunes. And that's where we got to that panorama that I shot. I'm still hoping for light from the east and clouds in the light from the east as dawn rises and clouds back behind to the north would just be the dream, to have this big puffy white clouds and light on those dunes and cool colors. In a little clearer atmosphere, it was hazy, but I'll take what we take. This is the best morning I've had out here for this shot. The best light for the morning that we've actually been out shooting it. And we all went out and I shot this panorama. And as I said, I grabbed all of the panorama images. Let me shrink my thumbnails down so we can see everything at the same time. I grabbed from my first to my last, and I did the typical Lightroom merger where you just go, just like we did with the HDR, except to say panorama, and it pops up and there's a limited number of choices, and out it spits this big panorama. And I just started quickly editing it and realized, oh, there's some problems with these kinds of shadowy lines. There's vignetting, given that I shot this with the 100 to 400. I didn't even go through and do any kind of sophisticated editing. This is pretty grungy. I just kind of enhanced it even more without doing any noise reduction to show you those lines that I could see popping up in the edit. And so I decided, I'll do this in Photoshop instead. And I just want to tell you all why I would do that, and why, if you have the Lightroom membership, you have this at your fingertips, so you should consider doing it too. I'm not going to select all, let's see, 4, 5, 6, 7, there's like 18 images here. I'm just going to select a few of them. Let's take some of the meat of them. If I went into Lightroom and I said merge as a panorama, I would bring up the panoramic merger preview. It's a lot like the HDR preview. It's a little more intense, so it takes a little bit more time. If I had all 18, this would have taken a long time. That's why I'm doing it quicker. I generally choose spherical, as I said, unless I'm shooting architecture or a forest with tree trunks that need to be perfectly straight, in which case I might choose cylindrical, and that will focus the distortion of mapping that three-dimensional world in 2 dimensions more on the edges and leave the middle with straight lines. I think spherical works best most of the time, particularly in landscapes and wide-angle scenes. I can click fill edges, and that's going to do content aware fill just like we had in Photoshop on these very simple edges. It's just blue sky and a little bit of desert grasses and rocky landscape. You see, it did a fine job of that. It's the same kind of engine that Photoshop uses for content aware fill. You could also do something called a boundary warp where it stretches the edges. I generally like content aware fill a little bit better. Same thing as the HDR settings. You can choose auto settings or not, and to create a stack of the images as you put them through. So, you go ahead and click on merge. That's what I did first, and you'll notice there was nothing about vignette removal. Well, let's take that same group of images and imagine we were doing all 18 of them. And instead, let's hit right click, and instead we say, instead of photo merge, we say edit in, merge to panorama in Photoshop. And what I really want to do is just show you that you have a more sophisticated layout here. All right. Now, when it comes to choices of projection, like we just talked about, we had spherical and cylindrical. We have more here that we could choose from, but auto works really, really great in Photoshop. I mean, I can count on one hand the many times I've had to pull it out of auto, and that generally is because I've got some straight architectural detail or tree trunks that need to stay straight that are showing some distortion from the projection, and I instead choose cylindrical and force it to keep the middle straight. But in general, I choose auto, and it does a fantastic job. You want to blend the images together, and look at this, vignette removal. That's the key thing that we didn't have in Lightroom that really is something you're often going to want in Photoshop. And then we have that same button for content aware fill transparent areas. Click. When I click OK, it's going to go through a longer, more detailed, a little bit more nuanced process. If I had all 18 of them, I might run over and make myself a cup of tea or something while I'm waiting, depending on how fast your machine is. But it takes some time to run through all of this alignment and then blending and then vignette assessment and vignette removal. And you'll wind up, if you do it all right, I'm going to cancel it because I've already done it, with a really nice end result. So I would just remember that. I think if you're a person who in high contrast scenes, your first thought is to jump out and apply a graduated filter, I would say really think about doing that on the light meter, 3 stops underexposed, 3 stops overexposed, blend all those guys into a nice, rich, detailed HDR image that isn't subject to some straight line of exposure change running through the middle of the frame. The world rarely throws us straight lines. This is a nuanced, higher quality way of doing things. And with the dynamic range we have in our modern cameras, 3 stops is where I go. You don't need to capture one image for every single stop. 3 stops apart is fine. You can look at the histogram on the back of your camera to make sure that you haven't blown the blacks on the most overexposed image, that they aren't black on the overexposed image, and that the highlights are preserved in the most underexposed image, and you'll be good to go to blend those into a linear raw file. You know, when you get your result and it's got some schmutz on it, remember that you've got really powerful tools in Photoshop to help you get rid of that stuff, that content-aware fill, that if you have a lot of sensor dust to remove, use that spot healing brush. It's quick, it's easy. Use a layer, a schmutz layer to get rid of that stuff, and you can save it to rework on it later if you want to adjust it. When it comes to doing panoramas, if you're getting results where you see little lines in the sky because you've got vignetting on your lens, jump into Photoshop instead. Send that to edit to assemble a panorama in Photoshop, and make sure you turn on the automatic vignette removal. It's powerful, powerful stuff. Okay, so I think you get the idea. It was an amazing trip. It was just a great group of people. We had a ton of fun and we had wonderful conditions, even though there were moments in that sandstorm where, you know, you kind of questioned your decision making, but not in the long run. It really did work out just amazingly. So we have a good time. If you want to join us on an adventure, you know, hopefully we won't have quite as much sand in our bags at the end of it, but we're going to be in the Palouse. The Palouse is an amazing place to photograph. I have had more incredible conditions in the spring in the Palouse than a lot of other places I've photographed. So I'm looking forward to getting together with that group. It's again in 15 days, last minute spot opened up. If you want to grab it, it's there for you. That link is in the description. You can also go to hudsonhenry.com/workshops to find it. Office hours, hope to see you there. The 26th, 10 a.m. Pacific. We're going to talk wildlife photography. David Archer is going to be there to give us some tips and tricks. We'll take your questions. I hope to see you there on Zoom or YouTube Live. I want to thank everyone for sharing, liking, subscribing, supporting this channel, and for using my links. Those links really help me out. You can find links to everything that I use and swear by at hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. Links to the stuff I talked about are in this video's full description. The stone bag, the tripod spikes that I love from Leofoto, and that Kinesis holster that fits the Z9 so well. All right, everybody. For those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, we're coming into spring. It's a great time to be photographing. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, it's fall, which is really my favorite time to be out photographing. So either way, it's a good time to be out there being creative. I hope you stay safe, have fun, and we'll see you next week.